Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. Talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Chris Young, titled I'm Comin' Over. So here's a fun question for you all. Imagine you're a reasonably popular artist and you catch wind that your genre is going to be shifting in a new direction, riding a big new trend. So you make the decision to hop on board that trend and it goes reasonably well, but not quite as well as some of your earlier material, not quite resonating with your distinctive audience in the same way. So what do you end up doing? Well, in the case of Chris Young, it's arguably pretty simple what you do. You pivot back to what you were doing originally and you keep up the regular routine. You've arguably got the easiest transition path after all, especially if you take a firmer hand in the songwriting. And when you look at Chris Young's career trajectory over the past 4 to 5 years, that's exactly what he ended up doing. Hitting it big in the latter half of the 2000s with a slew of #1 hits, he hopped on board the bro country trend for his 2013 album AM, hiring the best of Nashville songwriting machine to blend in his brand of new traditional, adult contemporary leaning country music towards what was cresting in the mainstream at the time, which was the whole bro country thing. And yet, even despite making what I would deem one of the best bro country albums and some of my favorite country songs of 2013, no jokes there, it wasn't exactly an album that produced the sort of hits that previous records like The Man I Want to Be or Neon have. And in a way that kind of makes sense. Chris Young has always been more of a mature romantic catering to an older crowd. Not the sort of guy that would play well with debauched party tracks about beers, cars, and trucks. It definitely helped matters that he seemed like a stand-up guy, so when rumors leaked that him being involved with Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert's divorce, Chris Young shot them down so emphatically and so immediately that I'm inclined to believe him, and that added a lot of believability to his more mature songs. So for his upcoming album, Chris Young seemed to be doing everything right this year. He cut his writing team down to a solid team of essentials, took more of a songwriting role than he had ever done on any album in the past, and with the lead-off single and the title track, made it very clear he was transitioning back to modern, yet neo-traditional country music. Hell, he even picked up Vince Gill for a duet, along with Cassadee, an artist I legitimately forgot existed since I reviewed her last album 2 years ago. For a mainstream country release, again, he seemed to be doing everything right. Come on, I didn't expect this would be better than, say, Mr. Misunderstood by Eric Church. I had some hopes that this would turn out pretty damn good. Was I right? Well, you ever have those albums that should be right up your alley and that you really want to like, and yet the more you listen through them, they seem to be missing that special spark that really makes them any good? That's I'm Comin' Over by Chris Young. It's not a bad album by any stretch. It's pleasant, it's generally listenable, the fans are gonna like it, but when you realize that Tim McGraw somehow made the more transgressive and interesting album out of recent mainstream country releases, you're in a lot of trouble. In other words, this is good, but I gotta admit, it was a disappointment. So let's start with Chris Young himself. And look, the guy's got a great voice. It's liquid smooth, he's got real gravitas in his lower range, and he's got a ton of charisma. All that can really make up for a lot, provided, of course, the production and writing can play to it. And you know what, the more I listen through this album, the first I realized the big, huge problem here: the production. James Shroud has been responsible for producing Chris Young's successful albums in the late 2000s, but for this record he swapped out for Corey Crowder and himself, and I can't tell you how bad of a decision that was. See, even up to AM, Chris Young's music had a thicker, heavier foundation supporting it. Meatier guitars, richer pianos, there was body and texture to his music to complement his voice. But across I'm Comin' Over, Chris Young seemed to have sanded away any hint of that body in his music, which led the guitar melodies feeling way too lightweight, and any sort of bass groove, providing you can hear the bass at all, feeling weedy and completely underweight. Chris Young completely overpowers any actual instrumentation on this album. Well, with the exception of the percussion, which seems to be at the only element set at the same volume, and yet bizarrely it feels really muddy, only really distinctive when you can tell the obvious drum machines creeping in on Alone Tonight or Sunshine Overtime, the latter of which has that choppy lack of groove you'd expect to hear on a Kelsey Ballerini song, not here. And of course, like all bad production, it's completely inconsistent. Mostly evident on the choruses or whether you're trying to focus on a prominent guitar relic or melody, all of which is squashed into a slurry beneath Chris Young's vocals. And probably the worst example being on Callin' My Name, which complements generic lyrics with production that somehow even feels more blurred over even on the verses. And you know what, the frustrating thing, that might as well be the motif of this album. Because while Cassadee mostly holds her own on one of the few highlights of this record, I Think of You, and even with that she gets one verse and is considerably quieter than Chris Young on the bridge or the chorus. Real good way to use your guest star there. The real crime is with Vince Gill on Sober Saturday Night, where he plays glorified backup singer with his guitar solo being more audible than he is. You could barely tell that Vince Gill's on that song. Talk about squandering the potential of an otherwise pretty decent track, where you can also apply to many instrumentals as well on this album. You get some solid melodic riffs with some steel guitar or electric guitar that open up a lot of songs, like on the title track or the gentle rollick of Think of You or I Know a Guy that actually has some acoustic texture, or that rattling scratch of the strums on Sober sober Saturday night. But the second that chorus kicks in, so much of it feels crushed and lacking any sort of distinctive instrumental melody or any sort of real texture to it. Then you have tracks like Underdogs, which seem to be destined to be played on ESPN for the next decade, and yet even there, the bite of the guitar riff feels oddly muffled even before the chorus. And when you take into consideration that most of these songs not only run short but easily feature more chorus than verses, or completely lack any sense of dynamics in the musicality or any real crescendos, a lot of this album just really runs together for me. But even the hints of synth or the organ that slips into the background of Sunshine Overtime or What If I Say feel all the more forgettable and honestly really quite bland. There just isn't enough real distinctive melody here to run through these hooks. Now, to give Chris Young credit, the one element that does do some heavy lifting on this album is the lyrics, in that while they're rarely great, they're never outright bad. I already mentioned that most of this album focuses on hooks and choruses, a bad sign when so many of the melodies aren't that memorable, but lyrically the writing has a good cadence and actually flows pretty well. And just like with previous albums, while there are a few generic love songs like Heartbeat or Call My Name, there are songs like Think of You that aim to go a little deeper. In that case, about being old hangouts and friends that can lose their sparkle after a breakup and you both go to the same place. Or take I Know a Guy, where Chris Young's speaking to an ex that he still wants to hook up, but framing it in the third person as he tries to show that he wants to get back together. I know it's not groundbreaking stuff, but it's reasonably clever, it's well executed here. Certainly better than You Do the Talk, and a song directed at his car radio while he just wants to sweet talk the girl. He wants the radio to do the talking. Yeah, it's just about as ridiculous as it sounds. The problem with the lyrics in this album aren't that they are precisely bad, again, but they're just kind of forgettable. Not particularly clever beyond a few structural gimmicks, and none of the subject matter steps a toe away from his regularly standard comfort zone that would cater to his audience. And you know, to most of Chris Young's older, more adult contemporary-leaning audience, that would be just fine, especially considered to the series of fumbles that have been Blake Shelton's transition back into this territory. But when Chris Young went towards bro country and probably made one of the best albums in that subgenre, again, I was hoping that in coming back to this brand of country music, he'd play things a little bit more maturity, or at least a little bit more of an edge. Instead, it feels like a bit of a regression with worse production. Nowhere near as classy or reserved as his older stuff, a bland facsimile of material he's done better in the past. As I said, this album's a real disappointment for me, especially coming off of AM, which I really liked. And you know what? It's getting a light 6 out of 10 for me. Sure, fans will like it, you'll probably give it a pass, but frankly, I'm not with you here. Chris Young's done better than this, and honestly, that's the real sad part. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.